Episode 9, New England Sports Media Podcast features Deyscha Smith, Boston.com, Boston Globe, and all kinds of basketball things as well as a freelancer. Deyscha joins us for this episode to talk a little bit about Boston.com, her career, all kinds of stuff. And we're glad to have you on. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I feel honored to be a part of this.
I don't know about that, but we'll go with it. Thank you. We feel honored to have you is what we should be saying. But all right, let's start right now. What has your job at Boston.com kind of looked like over the past few months, and has schools coming back and things like that maybe excited you about hopefully going to some more events?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with COVID-19, there were a lot of shifts, there weren't as many sports. And so the sports department, we actually got shifted to like general news assignments. So we were just really helping with the COVID-19 coverage on top of, whether it's sports coming back or the NBA bubble or the uncertainty at the time of whether football was going to be able to come back. But yeah, and so, I mean, honestly, it was a challenge. I'd never written about news at all. I'd never written just a general news story. And I was a little bit nervous because if you get the facts wrong in news, like that's literally information that people are getting. And so I was a little bit nervous, but, we just buckled down to the challenge. But I miss sports events. I miss like high school hoops showcases. I miss like games. I miss like a lot of college basketball. And that was definitely something, I had to check in with, players that I know and sources. Like I've checked in with like Terrence's family. I actually saw like some of his mentor Dexter in Home Depot the other day, which was like the first time I'd ever seen like anyone from that kind of college basketball, high school kind of like atmosphere. That was the first time I'd seen them in person and stuff. So it was definitely a challenge, but hopefully, like college sports comes back and I can be back there on the court, taking pictures and writing features and things like that. But yeah.
So like take us through like your relationship with Terrence Clark. Like how did that start? Because you guys seem pretty tight.
Yeah. So a few months into my job, when I'd first gotten hired, so I'm actually really good friends with this guy named Dave. Shout out to Dave's Joint. He's from New York, and he is like the go-to guy for high school basketball, especially like grassroots basketball. And in New York City, that's huge. And so Dave hit me up, and he was like, "Hey, like you're probably aware of this, but like you guys have like a huge time recruit in Boston, and his name is Terrence Clark." And I was like, yeah, like I've heard about him, And Dave was like, look, like this is gonna be his year, and like you should jump on that. And I was like, bet I will. And so I like to go through like the schools first. Like I'm not, some people like DM players directly and all that kind of stuff. But if I'm being honest with you, high school basketball players will not answer your DMs. Like, they're kind of low key famous in their own way. And so I like to go through the schools, and I like to go through, like adults because, they are, I don't want to say that they're kids, but I try to respect, the people that are around them. And so I reached out to Brewster and Coach Smith, Jason Smith. He responded like, yep, like that's totally cool. Like if you want to talk to Terrence, and this was in the summertime. So, Terrence wasn't necessarily busy with school and whatnot.
So this is summer of 18 or summer of 19?
This was summer of 2019. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this was like just when I had started because I graduated college from Mount Holyoke College in May. Okay. And I started working at Boston.com in June. And so literally like this was the first feature that I had pitched, and I was like, how does the Globe not have a story on like this literally like top recruit, right? That's right in, our own neighborhoods. And so, so I reached out to Brewster, and they're like, yeah, like Terrence will like send you an email or whatever. And it was a couple days and I didn't hear back from them. And so I reached out to them again. And next thing you know, I get this email, and it's like, hello, Miss Smith. Like, I would love to like talk to you, and like I would love to be a part of the story. Sincerely, Terrence. And I was like, what? And so
Yeah, there's definitely like a sense of innocence with a lot of these kids, right? Like even if they have like 100,000 followers or 500,000 followers on Instagram, they still like have some sort of like innocence to them, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and we can definitely talk about that more, but that's definitely something that always kind of interests me, is like how they carry themselves, because I remember being in high school, right? And I wasn't famous or anything. And yet, right, like to have like, 100,000 followers, and to know that, if you follow, like, basically if you follow all the steps, you will, probably go to the NBA, or play overseas or something. But yeah, and so to get that email, I was like, oh, like he seems like a nice kid already, although like no one calls me Miss Smith, like I'm 23 years old. But yeah, and so, and he had his phone number, so I sent him a text, and I always kind of joke with him, but like sometimes Terrence does not answer texts, and so I texted him, and he didn't respond. So I texted him again, like something like pretty chill, like, hey, like if you're down to do this story, like you have to hit me back with like eyes emojis or something. And he like responded like, sorry, like I think he was playing video games or something. And so then yeah, and then I also got in contact with Dexter, who's Terrence's mentor. And Dexter really coordinates a lot of Terrence's stuff, whether it's interviews or workouts and things like that. And so it was actually Dexter that coordinated our like meeting. And so yeah, I went to his Expressions Elite, who he plays for the AAU team. They had a practice right before they were going to leave for Peach Jam. And so Dexter was like, yeah, like you can, like come to the practice and you can interview Terrence afterwards. And the lead of the story that I wrote for the Globe and Boston.com is from that practice. So the original lead that I had wrote was like Terrence Clark can be heard before he's seen, because as soon as I walked into the gym, I heard him. Like he was literally like challenging people on the court, like, come on, like 1v1. And this was before the practice had even started. So I kind of got an idea of like how he is and his personality. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like when it comes to, like me and Terrence being cool or other players, a lot of it is just, like I'm young too. And so I just talk to them how I would talk to you guys, and I try not to, they have a lot of people that want things from them. And so I try to kind of make it clear, I want to tell your story, but I'm not, I'm not trying to gain a lot from you. I'm not trying to take advantage of you. And so, and, Terrence and I are also from the same neighborhood, so that also helps. But yeah, that's how we kind of start. That's kind of how we, got to know each other more. And, he and his family really let me in as the story kind of progressed through my reporting. And I'm definitely grateful for that, for sure.
Do you find that a lot of the bigger name high school players that you've covered, like a BJ Boston, for example, do they have a similar type of personality, or some of them more low key than Terrence?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're all different. Like, and, like, I would say, I try not to see them as like kids, right? So like I try not to like expect them to be immature or to be like full of themselves, or to, am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Or like, a lot of them to think like, yeah, like I'm the shit, like I'm verified and whatnot. I try not to have like expectations, but they're all different. Terrence is so funny and very like charismatic and has a huge personality. Brandon's also really funny. But he is a little bit like more low key, and he kind of has a little bit of like a quieter side. Unless he's really comfortable around you, then he's definitely out there. But they're all kind of different. They're all fun, and they're all friends. Like the first time I met Brandon was at the Sierra Canyon game in LA. I was just on vacation in LA, and I was like, let me pop by a Sierra Canyon game. And I requested to talk to him, not necessarily for a story, just because I wanted to, just talk to him and kind of get, myself out there. And, he was wearing like this neon pink Slam hoodie, and I have the same hoodie. So the first thing I said to him was like, oh, like you have like like really good style because I have the same hoodie. And he was like, oh, like you have drip. And like that's literally like how we started talking, but yeah, so they're all kind of different in their own ways.
I'd feel pretty good about myself. That's pretty sick.
Thanks.
How much do you care about, like, it seems like I mean, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm asking this question, but it seems like you kind of are more into like the in-depth storytelling more so than like quick recruiting stuff. Is that kind of like how you feel?
Yeah, features are definitely more of my thing for sure. The recruiting stuff is interesting, but it's like, I have my own qualms, I guess, of, basically taking like a 16, 17-year-old and like projecting where they're going to go or projecting this because, we were all there when we were deciding colleges, like that's not an easy decision and I couldn't imagine if you had to play. But yeah, I like features. I like getting to know them. I like revealing something that people might not know, and I like telling, the kind of the beginning stages of their story, like this is literally Terrence and Brandon and Aaliyah Boston and Shy Odom before they, really kind of, before they make it, I guess. But in some ways they've already made it. But I like kind of figuring that out, is like, who are these kids and, like, where do they see themselves going? But yeah, I like that way better than the recruiting stuff.
When you are thinking about like doing like the Brandon Boston profile for BR or some of the stuff you did for Slam, how do you kind of balance that like with your full-time job? Like this podcast is talking a lot about people like how they kind of do and be New England sports media. So how do you kind of balance like being able to do your full-time job with also like pursuing your interests in other ways?
Oh man, you guys, I did not get much sleep when I was doing all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like it was a lot. I mean, it was a lot. I would for the Brandon Boston profile, I'd wake up like 5 a.m. and write from 5 a.m. to 10. And then I would work for Boston.com 10 a.m. to 6. And then right after my work shift was over, I would work on that profile again. And so I literally was working like, 12-hour like work shifts, plus having to balance, you're right, like all, Boston sports and everything that's going on, 4 different sports teams, plus whatever Brandon's doing, always checking up on his Instagram story, and like I have a good relationship with his dad. And so, like I would talk to his dad a lot. It was definitely a challenge, but but I would say, even when we were back in the office and I was going to all the high school basketball showcases and stuff, I had to balance it then. Like, there were some events that I was going to simply off of, my passion and off of my enjoyment and not necessarily an assignment. And so a lot of it was balancing, work and then balancing, what really interests me, which is, high school basketball and features. But it was a challenge, I very much so had to, like plan out my days. Like, okay, for this 5 hours, it's going to be about Brandon. Then for this 8 hours, it's about all Boston sports. And then, from the time you go back to sleep, it's about Brandon again. So it was definitely tough, but that's what you do when you love sports and you love writing,
When you're writing a profile of that size, take me through your writing process. What do you focus on doing first? Do you outline the entire thing or do you just dive right into it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm really weird. I I start off when I'm thinking of a story, like when I'm thinking of a pitch, I literally start off by I draw. Like I like plan out like I don't know. I'm a very like visual learner, so I like get an idea of like I don't know, like colors and, all this kind of stuff. And so I get, all these markers that I have and I just like plan out, like I guess my own assumptions. So, like for Brandon, for example, I'd heard from Shy Odom that he's similar, that, Shy compared him to Batman. So, I like basically like drew this like Batman cartoon or whatever, like in my like journal or whatever. And I very much so was like, okay, is mysterious in a way. What's that about? You know, he has a lot going on. He does have a big platform. You know, does he actually like that? Does it stress him out at all? You know, he's about to go to Kentucky, which has a really young roster. You know, does he feel that kind of pressure? All that kind of stuff. And so I kind of plan it out visually. I think of headlines a little bit beforehand, but I try not to. And then, you know, when it comes to questions, I plan out a million questions. I think of everything I could possibly ask for. But in the interview, I don't look at them at all, which is so annoying. But, you know, I just go into it kind of like what you guys do for this podcast, like a conversation. And, you know, I try to pay attention to, you know, little details, and I press them about, you know, describing certain moments, you know, and, you know, when, for example, like Brandon can be a little bit quieter. And so, you know, there were times when, you know, I would ask him something and he would either give like a 1-word answer or a 1 sentence. And I'm like, okay, like, tell me more. Like, you know, like I know you have more to say, so tell me, or describe what this is like. And so that's kind of how I go into a profile is, you know, I just kind of think of, you know, I want the subject to tell me about themselves. I don't want to assume anything about them, but, you know, when you are a public figure, people do have assumptions about you. You know, people, you know, and especially for high school basketball players, you know, they might assume, oh, you know, these kids are just famous and, you know, they probably have an ego or something. But and so that's kind of my writing process is I kind of get my own assumptions out of the way, and then I open it up for like a conversation.
I'm curious, when you do these profiles and you're thinking of looking at other sources like beyond the person themselves, how do you find them, and are they always really willing to talk? You know, something that kind of comes to mind, you mentioned his dad.
Yeah.
I immediately I think of LeVar Ball and EJ Bates, right? And it seems like the dads are oftentimes very involved, which they should be. It's their kid. But I'm curious kind of how you leverage the opinions and the reporting on other sources, and how many sources do you talk to about one of these high school kids?
Yeah, that really depends. I would say, you know, for sources, honestly, I sometimes look at their social media, so I see, you know, like who do they hang out with? You know, for Brandon, I knew that his dad was a big part of his life because, you know, his dad is always on, you know, commenting on his Instagram, and he has his own Instagram, and, you know, he posts about Brandon a lot. So I knew that his dad was someone that, you know, I was gonna want to talk to. But, you know, for Terrence, for example, you know, Dexter, who is, you know, his kind of fatherly figure is more in the picture. So, you know, I would reach out to them. Sometimes it's tough. You know, I try to go through the school. So like to get Brandon's dad, I went through Sierra Canyon, and they, you know, basically like uh, made this group chat basically and put me, their media coordinator, and Brandon's dad in the group chat. And so, you know, that was hella helpful, and that made my job so much easier because he, you know, I had his contact information immediately. Um, but yeah, you know, and sometimes I ask the player themselves. I'm like, you know, are you really close with your mom? Are you really close with your dad? Like, who's influential in your life? But definitely, you know, when it comes to the dads or the parents in general, yeah, you do low key sometimes have a little bit of a LeVar Ball fear. Although, you know, LeVar is, you know, a complicated figure himself, and he is a big part of their lives, you know. But yeah, I mean, especially with the dads, you know, I try to put myself in their shoes. I'm really close with my dad, and my dad was my biggest critic when I was playing sports in high school and college. And so, you know, like I very much so know that if someone were to interview my dad, he'd have all sorts of hot takes and opinions and embarrassing stories, you know. And so I just kind of go about it like that, you know, is like, obviously, you know, they're parents, and, you know, they sacrificed a lot, whether it's driving them to all these things or, you know, time, and, you know, especially if they have other kids, you know, balancing attention and things like that. But, you know, I've very much so recognized that, you know, these are big parts of their lives. And so whether they're a LeVar Ball or they're Terrence's mom, who's so sweet, or they're, you know, like Brandon's dad, who's super cool. I just think, okay, Deyscha, like if someone were interviewing my parents, they have big personalities themselves. So try to put yourself in their shoes and don't assume anything about them.
That's
What
a great
about,
perspective. Go ahead.
yeah. And I mean, you have the parents' perspective, the coaches. What
Mm-hmm.
about you're going to some of these games like Jalen Murray, for example, and you run into like Lil Uzi? Like, what's the dynamic like there? Like,
You guys have done your research.
yeah, I was looking at the Instagram. I was like, oh, Lil Uzi, like, what is he like?
Yeah, I mean, when I ran into Uzi, that was a total like coincidence. I mean, last season, so I knew that I wanted to completely immerse myself in the high school basketball circuit. One, for my job, I knew that I wanted to help with Boston.com's high school basketball coverage, but off of my own interests. And last season was a really unique time for high school basketball. You have the Brewsters that are dominating. You have the whole madness of Sierra Canyon, right? And so I made this calendar, this huge calendar, and I literally found every high school basketball event I could find. And I was like, Deyscha, this season you might have to drive to every state in New England and elsewhere, Connecticut, New York, in order to go to these events. And I told my editor, Gary, that I was interested, and he was like, yeah, like apply for a credential, like do whatever you got to do. And so I would just go. Like there was one time I went to 2 high school basketball events in the same day. And I drove from like one part of Connecticut to the other part of Connecticut. But a lot of it is like knowing the players too. So like Jalen Murray, he is really close to A Boogie with the hoodie because Jalen's from New York. And so, or Juju is his nickname. He's from New York. And so he's really close to A Boogie with the hoodie. He's really close to Uzi. He's in that sphere. And I knew that beforehand. And so when I was at the event, and I heard whispers, that might be, Uzi and his crew or whatever. And so I just kind of looked up and I was like, that person looks so familiar up there, surrounded by like all of, his crew basically. And then after the game, I knew, okay, Juju is close to, Uzi. He does know them. So, if you want to get, closer after the game, go to him. And so I went down there at the same time that Uzi was walking onto the court, going to like dap him up. And so that's basically how it kind of happened. And when I went to the Battle at the Apple Showcase in New York, I knew that Juju's team was going to be there. I knew that Terrence is really close to like Jaylen Brown and things like that. And so, yeah, I just kind of was like, there might be a possibility that their homies pull up. And I've just gotten pretty lucky that that's been the case. And I bring my camera too. To kind of document it.
What about like in Boston? You also go to a lot of the college games, like the Harvard kids, the BCs of the world. What strikes you about like the Harvard basketball players? There's something like when I've talked to them, it's just the program is very like different, like they have a lot of really highly ranked recruits coming out of high school, like top 100 kids that stay for 4 years and they're at Harvard. Like what strikes you about that team and those kids and why are you so kind of interested in them? I know I'm extremely interested in them too.
Yeah. No, Harvard, especially last season, I was just really, I've always been impressed by how they are like post game, they actually really take the time during the press conferences to answer questions. And, the coach, Tommy Amaker, is super articulate. And he's the type, there's, he will remember your face. He will remember your name. He'll look you in the eye when he's answering questions, and Harvard had a pretty good run. It sucked because, COVID and stuff, but yeah,
BU did too.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, no. And, like going to all those Harvard games and showing up and being consistent, like that was a big part of, getting to know the players, getting to know, all of the different media people. I met Brett Hampton, the photographer at the Harvard game, and that, eventually turned into me doing a story about him. But yeah, no, I mean, Harvard was just like a really fun team, whether it was their personalities, they were, electric, especially last season, the way that they were playing. You have Brett Hampton behind the scenes doing all of their media stuff. And so their game highlight videos would be lit and all that kind of stuff. And so it was just a really like special moment. And it really sucked because of COVID that they didn't really get to, have their run the way that they would have wanted to.
So you've done a lot of basketball. I know you do some other stuff. Are there any other sports or like that you think that have athletes you might be interested in profiling, especially at like the high school, like younger kids level?
Yeah, lately I've been really into like football. And I gotta give credit to, having to cover the Patriots games every single Sunday. Because now I'm like low key like a football head too. Like I think football is so much fun. And the Patriots are really, I feel like they're gonna be really fun this season. Yeah, I'm really interested in like high school football. Like I don't know if you guys watch like, there's like Last Chance U, and there's
Yeah, of course.
and like other kind of shows like that. But I think like high school football players are also pretty fun, and like they have their own types of personalities. Basketball, there's hoops culture, and there's a lot that goes into it, whether it's them like high school basketball players, they love their mixtapes, they love their Instagram pics, they wear like really short shorts now, that's a whole thing. And yeah, high school football is its own thing, and like I've definitely been really like interested in that. And yeah, I would love to do a profile on like a high school football player or a program. Friday Night Lights, I've read the book, huge fan of the show. It would be really cool to go into like a small town, or even a small town here in Massachusetts, right? And like kind of like dive.
Can I give you a suggestion?
Sure.
So Liam and I always talk about Everett High School is
Yeah.
just like, as you know, but like I would love a Deyscha Smith story behind the scenes of the Everett football program because they're different. They got like
Different.
20 D1 kids a year, like kids going to Michigan, and like that doesn't happen in New England anywhere.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, Everett is definitely really, really interesting. Also, like high school football culture and like East Boston is like also really different. And also I think being from Boston and growing up in Massachusetts, that helps a lot. I know the areas. I know, people that went to, Everett High School and all sorts of high schools. And so I'm a little bit familiar with like the vibes.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's a big part of my reporting is the vibes. Like I'm a huge vibe person. And so when I look for anecdotes and interviews, I just really pay attention to the vibes. But yeah, no, I mean, that would be lit. Maybe I'll like pitch something like that. And especially, and you also have to think about timing. That's also
Right.
a huge part of journalism. And right now, there isn't necessarily, there's uncertainty about a high school basketball season, right? But, there could there's in certain districts, there's going to be, high school football practices, and they're thinking about, having like a floating season, fall 2 or whatever. So high school football could come back in the spring. And so, yeah, it could be good timing to like get the reporting now. And then, you get all your anecdotes and you see how the season goes. And then you drop it and people are like, oh, this is cool timing or whatever.
What about, so you've been in Boston for like, you were born here, you went to college, you went to Mount Holyoke, which which is not in Boston, but
Yeah.
in New England.
Yeah.
And fairly close. And I know you've done some stuff in New York. You said you went to vacation to LA. Are there any cities that you'd like to like eventually in your career live and work in?
That's a good question.
Or are you like Boston is me, like I'm here forever?
I mean, honestly, I love Boston. Obviously I'm a, New England sports fan. I didn't really have a choice growing up, and, I would always love to continue to tell the stories of my city. But, like California, I mean, if we're thinking as far as like high school basketball and all that kind of stuff, the West Coast is on a different type of wave, and they're pretty fun. I also think like the South really interests me, and, especially being a person of color, football in the South is huge. And I would love to maybe dive a little bit deeper into my own Southern roots. My family's from Georgia, so like it would be really cool to like go down there, you know, and like maybe do something like that. But I'm the type of person, like wherever the wind blows, I guess, you know. I love Boston. I love New York, especially in the summertime. The grassroots basketball scene in New York is different. And Boston, we need to get on that wave, because in New York City, like you go to Dykeman and stuff, like it's literally a movie. Like, and so that would be really
Yeah,
fun.
literally. Kyrie Irving.
No, literally, like, you know, and LA is also really cool. You know, and Sierra Canyon is its own madness, and they'll always be really interesting, especially with Bronny and stuff still there. But honestly, it's really just kind of where the wind blows. I kind of chase the story, and my personal life and my personal interests kind of like shift according to that. You know, like I went to LA on vacation, not necessarily for a story, but you know, my passion is basketball. So I was like, I'm in California, they're literally playing. Let me, you know, drive up to, or, you know, take the rental car or whatever. I was actually with Nicole Yang, and I were on vacation together in LA. I couldn't even drive. I don't even know why I was saying that, because I can't rent a car. I'm not old enough. So she drove all the way up to Sierra Canyon, and I was like, you know, like this could be a story in the future. And I wouldn't have known that months later I'd do a profile on Shy, and then months later I'd do a profile on Brandon. So yeah, I just kind of like go where the wind blows and find stories wherever I can find them.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. Like that's some shit that we would do on vacation too. Like I
Right?
love that.
Roman Catholic in Philly. We went to a game. Jalen Duren, Justice, whatever, Williams, freshman year. Never forget it.
That's so dope. And like, again, like, and that also keeps the job fun, you know, like, you know, I when I went to the Sierra Canyon game, LeBron was there, D Wade was there, right? Like, and it was an exhibition game. Like their season hadn't even started, you know, and here I was, like, you know, I said, you know, I was around Bronny, I saw him in person, all that kind of stuff. And it just kept it fun. You know, it's a lot, it's just so much more enjoyable when like you're working, but it doesn't necessarily feel like you're working, you know?
Yeah, like that hoop hall scene, that was crazy. Like, I mean, I was there too, obviously.
Yeah.
Like when LeBron walked in, like people were like losing it, you know?
Exactly.
And
You
then
know?
that dude tweeted that Springfield was 5 minutes away from Boston, which is just like the worst take of all time.
Right. Like, what are you talking about? But again, like when you're from New England, right? Like, you know, those little things.
Yeah.
So yeah, like when I
I'm
saw
still
that,
trying to figure out if he flew or drove there. Do you know?
I don't know. I heard that he flew, but I honestly think that they might have just driven. But
Yeah,
then again, he's LeBron, so maybe
yeah, they could put him in a private plane
I
or
don't
something,
know.
or helicopter or whatever.
Right, but yeah, no, right. And like hoop hall was so much fun, and you know, Greg, but like I was on the court taking pictures,
Yeah.
and you know, even the kind of the like observational scene about Brownie that I wrote
Yeah.
afterwards, like that was all with no notes. That was literally me and what was in my head, and
Right.
you know, having more of a visual eye, which is where the photography comes in. But it was so much fun. Like I was having a great time. You know, my family watched the game. You know, they saw me on the ESPN
That's cool.
thing a little bit. Yeah, like it was a great time. And you know, and I personally write so much better when it's fueled by passion, and when it doesn't feel like, you know, I'm in school again writing an essay, right? You know, I write off of passion. I'm fueled off of passion. And so, you know, it just makes it so much more enjoyable, I would say.
Fuel off passion. That's a very good way to look at it. I like that. I feel like that should be like a tattoo or something. Or like an Instagram bio. Maybe that's more the safer way to go. But nah, yeah, it was great having you on here. Deyscha Smith, Boston.com, Boston Globe, and basketball all over the country.
Thanks.
Maybe all over the world someday. Who knows? Maybe you'll go do the next Luka Doncic over somewhere.
I mean, you never know. I mean, that's another thing too. Like, you know, I went to a Chinese immersion high school, so I speak Mandarin, and you know, basketball is huge in China.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll do like a China, I don't know, basketball.
Yeah. Hopefully, I mean, knock on wood, hopefully that's sooner rather than later. But
I I know. But yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. You guys are awesome. This shout out to this podcast. You know, it's funny, like media people, we're not really asked much about ourselves. And so it feels a little bit weird, but this was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no doubt. We loved having you, and we hopefully will have you on again. Friend of the pod, Deyscha Smith.
Anytime.
All right. Thanks so much. We'll be back with our next episode soon. And thanks again to Deyscha Smith for joining us.